Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
How's it going, Susan?
Going great. How are you?
Good. Welcome to the Ethics Experts. Been excited to get you on. We had a really fun pre-call conversation, and I saw you at HCCA in Orlando, and so glad we could finally connect here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Good. So I always like to start by asking, where did it all begin? What were you like growing up? What kind of kid were you, and what was your childhood like that brought you into this space?
Well, I was a geeky little bookworm kid, but also more relevant, I think, my dad was a state patrol ballistics expert. So I grew up with True Detective and Guns and Ammo. I know how to run a ballistics exam. I grew up at the range. So I had that whole piece of my life early on. So early on, I was kind of just a geeky kid. And I guess I've never really changed. I just refined it, I guess, as I grew up. I discovered I loved medicine and healthcare and physiology when I was in college. And then my first real job, I worked at Blue Shield and started finding people that were lying on their applications. So I started following some of these dirty dog lying cases and ended up being the fraud person, and moved into that role, and worked with legal counsel a lot. And then I loved it so much, I went to law school. And from there, I ended up getting hired as at a law school to be compliance and legal intern. And I didn't even know what compliance was at that point. So I just, in a way, fell into it. But to me, it's perfect because it's, the nexus between law and medicine, and it's never boring.
So when you were finding those dirty dogs, what kind of stuff were they lying about on their applications? Or this is back a long ways, before the various healthcare reforms. And I was a medical underwriter. And so people were applying for individual coverage or even Medicare supplements. And I was the underwriter. And I was finding that they weren't putting things in there. And I had a pretty good nose for it after a while. And I could tell when I needed to request records, and we found, there were people that were double dipping and they were having an individual coverage along with group coverage. One guy even told my boss that we paid for his car. There was some real dirty stuff, not just, poor people that needed coverage. It was some like outright fraud stuff. So you kind of wet your beak, so to speak, in that doing some of this kind of fraud detection work. Why do you think you had such like a mind for that? Was it sort of a like internal wiring of the injustice of it? What made that work interesting, and what do you think kind of set you on the path? Like, what role did that play in setting you on the path that you ended up taking?
I think what I really liked was it was like a puzzle, right? It was a justice issue, but it was also a puzzle, figuring out, who did what and catching them at it, basically. So I loved that. And I ended up working for the federal employee program as the fraud person. And that was my full-time job. So I was doing records audits and all kinds of stuff. So I really learned the healthcare world from that perspective, from the payer side, and reading chart notes and learning Medicare rules. So all of that really laid the groundwork. And when I got into law school and started looking for internships, that was when I networked my way into an internship at a big health system. And I had wanted to go into the fraud and abuse work. That was my goal. But the health system brought me in. And then when I got familiar with the compliance side of things, I realized that it wasn't a whole lot different. I was still doing investigations, and I was still solving problems and sorting out truth versus fiction and a lot of the same things.
What was it about law school that attracted you to that path? Like, what made you say, you know what, I'm doing this thing? Like, was that kind of always the plan? Or was, as you kind of got deeper into it, you were like, this is a natural sort of next step for my career and where I want to go? Some people end up going to law school because they're my daughter's this way. Since she could talk, she's always wanted to be a lawyer. And she argues everything. So maybe that's a natural path for her.
Well, I do that sometimes too.
But then other people, they kind of start going down a certain path and they're like, well, I want to go to law school and figure it out and kind of see where it goes. So where do you kind of fit on that spectrum?
I never wanted to go to law school. It never even occurred to me until I started doing the fraud work. And my boss, and I owe a lot to her. I was pretty young and new, and she saw that I was doing those cases. And she said, I want you to just work with legal counsel. She's like, I don't need to be involved, which is unheard of, right? For a young person to be sent to legal on their own, for cognizance or whatever. So having great attorneys that taught me how to do some of that work and allowed me to really grow.
Mm-hmm. And then sometimes like when you start doing it, you're like, oh, I could kind of see myself doing this, or, you kind of got some exposure to
more. it. If I'm doing the legal work, I should be getting paid for it. Yeah. And it's something I enjoy. So that's what I thought. I thought I was going to go into that side of things.
So you figure out a way to get this internship. Tell me about that. Because it sounds like they very quickly you very quickly sort of gravitated to this work that was really, that you were really passionate about.
Yeah, well, my first internship was with a health system, and it was one that was posted at school. And I thought, oh, well, I worked for Blue Shield. I still did at that point. And it's like, I've got this healthcare career already. So I saw a healthcare internship, and then the funds on that one got cut very quickly after just a few months. But the general counsel gave me some names of people to network with. Okay. And so I just started networking in that group of people. And then I landed at a big local health system and networked my way in. So they had me come in all I did was ask for informational meetings. Smart. And they had me come in like on a Thursday or a Friday. And they said, we don't have any positions or anything, but they had the whole team of lawyers and the compliance officer there to meet me.
Wow.
And there was no job on the table. So I was very relaxed. I was just chatting with them. And then the next Monday or Tuesday, they made me an offer. So
I find things like that happen a lot more than people think. Uh-huh. When you were going in there, were you just kind of truly going from an informational perspective? Were you just really just trying to learn? Or were you kind of hoping that they might create something, or you know what I'm saying?
I wanted a job, and they were probably my fourth round of informational meetings. I had some guys from Physicians Insurance Group take me to lunch. I had someone at a law firm. So I had a number of these different meetings, and it did help me to kind of get a sense of where I might fit. Mm-hmm. But then the health system, they just gave me a wonderful offer for an internship. And I was going to be working 50% legal team, 50% compliance. And I was like, well, whatever compliance is, okay. Yeah.
So when you started,
one guy for this entire system. This is when compliance was a binder on the shelf, and that was about it. So I've been through the whole thing with compliance.
So what did you start to see? Half your time's legal, half of your time is compliance. It's sort of in the binder on the shelf era. What did you start to see on that compliance side that ended up kind of pulling you into that orbit that was interesting, or that you saw opportunity in?
Well, one thing that pulled me, because it didn't take me long to get moved over to compliance, and I made that request to be the regulatory attorney after I, passed the bar and was in there, because I found that I didn't like looking at contracts all day and never getting out in the world. Right. At the same time, compliance was using me to do investigations from Anchorage to Burbank. And I always loved investigations. So that was always one of my strengths. So that was more operations, getting my sleeves rolled up and feet on the ground and working with people out in the organization. And I really liked that. But I got so busy with that. And then HIPAA also was just rolling out. That's how old I am, God. So HIPAA and investigations, all this stuff was so much interesting stuff going on. And it was more than a half-time job because no one else was doing it. And turns out that they hired me, I'm pretty sure, because I had that investigations background. So I was the one that got all these interesting cases.
And so what makes a good investigator in your mind?
A good investigator can relate to anybody and put them at ease. At least for me, I could talk to anybody and have them quickly relax and act like
I'm so relaxed right now.
Huh?
I'm so relaxed right now.
Yeah, well, you're supposed to be. That's your job. But I mean, that's a big part of it. And I find that, and well, I'll be honest, when I was doing the fraud work for the insurance company, my biggest technique was to play dumb because I was young and blonde. And I found that they would just edit charts right in front of me because they just didn't think I ever knew anything. And then I'd go back to the office and I'd write up the repayment request. So I won't recommend playing dumb, but it does help if they don't see you as threatening. So I think that's a big piece. I'm not here from corporate and I'm going to bust your chops. No policing. It's, I'm just here to help sort out what happened. And I want to hear, your view on it. And then, like that. I had some huge investigations, and early on when I was barely past law school, and they were some pretty significant cases where executives lost their jobs because of what they were doing.
Wow.
So it was interesting times.
At that time,
I totally answered your question, but I partly did.
Yeah. I mean, kind of dumb like a fox, tell me some more about that kind of mentality, a sort of an unassuming kind of a vibe that helps people to kind of relax and feel open so that you can kind of get to it. Not that coming in with the trench coat and the, that causes people to like clam up. What are some of the other characteristics? Because like the reason I'm asking this is because I find investigations to be something that a lot of people think is like very simple. And I think there is really like a wide array of like quality with respect to investigators. And I think it's I think it's a skill to build. It's not something that you're just like wired to be an investigator, No.
And I mean, I don't know if my particular approach would, different people have different personalities too. So, somebody who's real buttoned up, here's the rules and I need the answers kind of person would have a hard time doing it the way I do. But, they have a role as well. So I don't really know the answer. I think part of it, and this is a challenge to me still, is to go into it with a totally open mind. Because a lot of times you go into it and you pretty much think you know what happened.
Right.
And I've learned that asking the same question of a variety of people is the way to get to the truth. Because even if doesn't seem related, even if it's like, well, tell me about your department and what's going on in your department, or, are there any problems? And you'll get a range of answers. But usually if there's something, you're going to hear the same thing from, So to me, that's the best thing to ferret out the truth. And
and that's kind of what you're describing, ferreting out the truth kind of requires a certain openness. And there's a lot of, maybe these are kind of stereotypes, but that sort of like tunnel vision, that sort of myopic view from an investigator. Sometimes they can create sort of the self-fulfilling prophecies. And sometimes they can miss other sort of tangential issues because they're not bringing that openness.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's another thing, really keeping your ears and eyes open, because a lot of times there is more than what's being alleged. In fact, sometimes the thing that brought you into the investigation isn't the worst thing that's going on.
Exactly.
And they don't even necessarily know it, or they were afraid to bring that issue up. So it is a skill set, but a lot of it is just being open-minded and really just keep asking those questions. I don't go in there with a set list of questions. I have some general questions, but then each question having a dialogue and really drilling down and can you help me understand what you just said about this or that, or how does that work? Like I don't understand. And just letting them go through all of it you do come out of it with a great picture of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you'll see things that are like, oh my gosh, that's not even on my list.
So you were talking about HIPAA was just kind of coming out, and your work kind of was supposed to be kind of legal, then compliance, and then, you ended up kind of falling more on the compliance side just because there was so much to do. There was a ton of investigations that you were jumping into, and then HIPAA was coming out, and you said that you found kind of both of those things interesting. What was it about HIPAA in those days that was so interesting? What were the big challenges, and what were the big new muscles that the organization had to build as this new regulation was kind of cast upon this industry?
Oh my gosh. Well, I was in a multi-state system, and I was the regulatory attorney, the one and only one. There was other attorneys, but I was tasked with this stuff. So think about, to me, I guess I always like a challenge. It was just this huge bolus of work. And there were people in each state, region that were good people that I was working with. So it wasn't like I had to do all the lift, but we had to put together all the policies and the training and everything. So, and state laws, had to look at those and consider all of that, all the process changes, things like tracking disclosures. I remember that was a huge thing, that it was this huge undertaking to meet that requirement. Rewrite all the notices, rewrite to have a notice of privacy practices. It was just massive. So it was a good learning experience for me. I'll never have a bigger project than that one, probably.
Yeah.
It was,
right.
It was amazing. And then, while I was there, we had one of the first big breaches in healthcare. So I had lobbied to be the privacy officer because they had designated a person who already had a full-time job doing, I don't even remember what her day job was, but and she was in a different state. She was in the corporate office, and she was overwhelmed. It was too much. Whereas it aligned with my job, and I had already learned every word of the regulations. So I asked if I could get that job on top of the attorney job. So they made me the privacy officer starting on January 1 of whatever year it was. And I was on leave prior to that. I had a personal leave. And on January 1 or 2, probably, it was 2 or 3, whatever day it was, and I went back to work. And the next day I got a call from a guy who was the designated security officer, who was also a guy that just wore that hat as a token thing, wasn't really, regulatory guru or anything. And he said, well, I assume you heard about the breach. And I'm like, what?
Welcome back to work.
Yeah, no, I've been privacy officer for like one day, and that's the first I've heard of it. And he said, well, there was a whole duffel bag of backup tapes and discs stolen out of this IT guy's car.
Oh my gosh.
So the night before I took that job, we had that happen. And it was the first big breach. So we had to figure out the standards around notifications, all of that. So we probably helped write the industry standard on breach response. And it kind of took over my life after that. Not only that incident, but then we had, every time there was any incident, I ended up on the group, helping them figure it out, who to notify, who needs notices, what are the breach response rules that we need to look at, and, the whole thing. I became the breach queen for a while there, because it seemed like when we had one that many states, you're going to have them all the time. We had home services people that were losing laptops, you name it.
Right.
So we did do that response, and it was another great learning experience. It was huge.
So I want to go back to the HIPAA thing. You talked about it being the biggest project that you ever had to do. It was a new muscle for the organization to build. You kind of alluded to a lot of the, notices you had to rewrite, and the policies you had to write, and the training and all that kind of stuff. What did you learn about change management as a result of that, that project? Like, what lessons did you learn? Because you were coming in and telling people to do their jobs in a different way in many cases, I'm sure. And how did you kind of go about that? And I'm asking this in the context of a lot, from my perspective, compliance in general is really a change management job. You're always pushing some kind of change. There's a new risk or a new regulation, or there's a new technology, or there's whatever. There's something you need to do to kind of improve your program to de-risk the organization. Mm-hmm. And change management is not something that comes naturally to everybody. Some people are better at it. Some people have had better experience, certain experiences that, kind of paved the way for them to drive change management in a more, effective way. So what did you kind of learn from that? And what sort of strategies did you kind of employ to roll out this massive change across the system?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing is that I'm not the process expert. And that applies to almost anything that comes up. So to me, the biggest learning was to build trust and align myself with the people that own the processes. Find out, like any line of the regulation, we're required to post a notice on our website or give this to patients. Okay, so talk to my privacy officers, talk to the people that are going to have to do that work, and listen to them about best way to do it and the different organizations we had across the company and what their processes were going to be, who should do it, and then kind of synthesize all that and work with them and get their feedback as we write the procedures. And the procedures at that organization had to be very high level and just have the core elements that were required, because I quickly learned that here's a big learning, you can't micromanage 5 states with one procedure document. So you have to write policies and procedures, number one, in conjunction with stakeholders and the process owners and various smart people that are a lot closer than I am to doing it. And then the other thing is keep it very basic and high level so that they can write their own detailed department level procedures, rather than me in the ivory tower saying, here's the process you all have to follow. So that doesn't make sense in a large organization. And that's a recipe for lots of fights, because they're going to say, you're sitting at the corporate office, what do you know about it? So one of my big learnings in terms of change management in a very large organization where I was in the corporate office was I work with them first and identify what do we need to do, but then talk to them about how to do it. And not assume that I go in there and I'm like, here's the 5 things that you have to do tomorrow, but go in there and say, we got these 5 things and I want to talk to you. And so we can find the solution of the best way to do it, and then write a high level policy and just approve their procedures, make sure they're doing it right. But it's the core policies and procedures, and then having it be localized and not cramming anything down their throats, but let them be a part of it because they know more than I do. And I think throughout my career, that's been a huge piece of all of it, is when I'm working with people in operations, they know more than I do about what they do. So I learn from them and I help them solve problems, meet, regulatory requirements, but they have to be at the table because they're the experts.
Yeah. And I'm sure that your kind of inherent openness has really lent itself well to that kind of collaboration that's necessary for any change to actually A, take place, and B, to get the benefit of that expertise of these various people that own these different processes.
Yeah. I mean, like one example, one of my other big projects was to do the first compliance risk assessment from Anchorage to Burbank. Just me. No assistant, no sidekick, just me. So I wrote up questions for every line of business, supply, pharmacy, human resources, business office, up and down the coast. And I went up and down the coast. It was a massive project. We had one business office that was very influential in the company. They were very strong, very smart people there. And when I scheduled my interview with them, they said, we don't need your help, but thanks anyway. I was like, no, I said, I need your help. And this is what I'm trying to achieve. And you guys have the expertise in the company that you can help me, identify where some of our vulnerabilities might be. So then they were gracious and they had me down there. But they did not want any help from corporate. Thank you. And that's another thing, is learning who those people are that are very influential, but you have to approach them the right way. And the funny follow-up note to that was, it was like a year later, I was off sick with a cold or something, nothing major. And those ladies sent me flowers. I couldn't believe it.
So you picked that lock somehow, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So I learned a lot of that just from being in a large political organization. You know, you either learn or you fail.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
I learned that my own personality is that way anyway, is to listen and learn and help. And that builds trust. And once you have trust, there's always someone knocking on your door and coming to you and willing to help you.
So if someone feels like, somebody who's listening, if they feel like they struggle with that, or they struggle to get that buy-in, you know, I'm somebody who believes that like every lock can be picked. There's got to be a way to resonate with some, like there's always a way over, around, under, through, whatever the impediment is. That could be a personality, that could be a problem, whatever. But in our industry in general, there's kind of this recurring theme that I've continued to see over the years of struggling to get that buy-in and struggling to get that sort of endorsement, and, you know, people instead paying lip service to compliance and not actually adopting the things that they need to adopt and so forth. This is why I think compliance many times feels like a lonely job. It feels like your wheels are spinning, you know, you're kind of pushing a string up the hill, whatever you want to say. What advice would you give somebody who's maybe feeling that in their highly political organization?
I think it's important to really maybe take a step back and look at what are the impediments, and be willing to do a self-assessment too. You know, I mean, I learned some very hard lessons when I was still at my very first job, you know, at the health insurance company, about how you approach people. And, you know, think about it. And you can even talk to someone that you trust and say, you know, that you see breaking down barriers. I mean, it might be a different role, but you can get other people's input. You can get some coaching. But I think the main thing is to show people, not tell, show them that you're there to help them. Mm-hmm. This is a support role. And I tell them, you guys are doing the hard work. You're handling patients. Like, you know, my hands are off of that. So, you know, I want to help you so that you don't have to worry about these sorts of issues. And I just want to talk to you to understand what you need. And then I want to help make sure that you have what you need, but also to protect you and the organization from some of these risks that are out there. So you don't have to waste your time worrying about it. And that's worked really well for me.
You know, what's interesting is, like, you know, the stereotype of a compliance officer is almost the antithesis of what it takes to be a great compliance officer. The stereotype is this sort of rigid, sort of closed-minded, sort of policing type of a function. And, you know, where it's like my way or the highway. That's kind of the stereotype kind of across corporate America. And I find that what it takes is like a lot of openness. It takes a lot of creativity. It takes a willingness to, I don't want to say take a back seat, because the compliance stuff is obviously very important, but like the way you just framed that, of like the big thing is patience in your industry. So like I'm playing a support role and I want to kind of come up behind you and help you. I mean, it's like such an opposite. You know what I'm saying? It's like what it takes to be great in this industry and in this role is really the opposite of what, like, you know, the average, you know, employee in the average organization thinks of compliance.
Yeah, it is. And I don't like taking all your time telling stories, but I do have one that's a good lesson for people if they're that type of person that you described. I did an interim compliance officer job at one hospital and helped them hire somebody. And we didn't have a lot of choices. I think maybe the location or whatever. Yeah. So, you know, I wasn't really in love with the candidate, but it was the best of what we had. So They hired this individual. And 6 months later, I got a phone call from one of my buddies that she did contract management or something. And if she's listening, she'll recognize this story. She said, guess who just got fired? And I said, who? And she said, that compliance officer. And I said, what happened? Well, the story was that he ran roughshod over the chief of surgery, who was having a lunch with a bunch of residents, and some vendors had brought in some meals. And this compliance officer, in front of everybody, started raking him over the coals for doing that. And don't you know we're not allowed to do such and such and such? So this chief called his friend who's on the police force and said, find some dirt on this guy. Well, lo and behold, there was some dirt on that guy, and he had not been accurate on his application. Now I'm not saying you should be a crook and keep a job, but if he had played that basic cards right, that would never have come up. They might not have liked him, but they wouldn't have wrote him out of town on the rails. But because he made an enemy of a powerful person by being totally politically incompetent,
totally, yeah,
and obnoxious, and doing here's the rules and rah, rah, rah in front of everybody, instead of, talking to the guy later and saying, we really can't be doing this. So yeah, he's gone. I don't know what happened to him. And I ended up being back there as an interim.
But I mean, it's like, this is a people business at the end of the day. It's not a words on the page business.
That's
and I understand that there are these governing documents and there are these regulations that we have to adhere to and so forth. Like, those are the words on the page. That's the black and white of it. But like, it's humans at the end of the day. You have to get the buy-in from folks if you're going to actually change that behavior. And that's part of why I think this industry is so interesting, because you're constantly like trying to change things and you're constantly trying to improve things and, pursue this like ideal of perfection, whatever that means, even though it's unattainable, which takes, persuading human beings to do things in different ways.
It does. I mean, people are inherently self-interested, right? And
100%.
Most people are trying to do the best they can at their jobs. So if you let them think that your role is to make their life easier rather than impose a burden on them, it's a whole different thing. And you can get the same result with a totally different frame.
There's this, my favorite, remember Aesop's Fables? Remember that? Mm-hmm. My favorite one is the sun and the winter wind, the north wind, are arguing on who's stronger, who's more powerful. And the sun is saying, I'm more powerful. And the wind is saying, well, I'm way more powerful. And they're debating back and forth. And they see this traveler walking across a field. And the sun, they say, okay, well, why don't we see who's stronger by who can get this person's coat off? And so the wind like rolls his sleeves up and just starts blasting this traveler, with this cold wind. And what does the traveler do? He like bundles up even more. And then the wind, finally is like, you're never going to get it off. If I couldn't get his coat off, you can't get it off. And so the sun parts the clouds and starts just shining some warmth on the guy. And, after a couple of minutes, he takes that off. And I think that's a great fable in so many different like areas, but it's such a great analogy. It's a great one for compliance, because if you're coming in, you're trying to blast somebody's coat off, they're just going to bundle up more. And nobody, the average stakeholder in your organization is not waking up on Monday morning, driving to work, thinking about compliance. They're thinking about their job. They're thinking about their mortgage. They're thinking about their kids. They're not thinking about that thing. And while I don't want to call it a necessary evil, because it has like such a negative connotation, but it's, to your point, it's a second line. It's a support thing. And if we're bringing the wrong energy, or we're bringing the wrong interactions or the wrong sort of posture to these other departments that have their own priorities, we're always going to keep spinning our wheels, and we're always going to be sort of stiff-armed and kept away from the business and things like that.
Yeah. We have to show that we're a benefit, not a detriment.
Right. Which, I think you're totally spot on. And it's interesting to me that compliance struggles so much in doing that. Because it's 2026, compliance has been around for decades now. Why has that light bulb not turn on across the economy, across all these different industries? Why are we still struggling with the framing around compliance in the average minds of the average stakeholder or the average employee? Like, what do you think about that?
I don't know. That's a great question, because even like people that I've helped hire for these roles, and they say, oh, I collaborate with the stakeholders and I do all these things, and they sound wonderful. And then 6 months later, I hear from some of the employees and they're like, that's not how they're behaving. So, it sounds great in the interview, but I think it's kind of how you have to live. And prove yourself. And unfortunately, because of the ones that do run roughshod over folks, the rest of us have twice as much work to earn trust.
Well, yeah, because it's not like every interaction is like a tabula rasa. Like people are bringing their own, I don't want to be dramatic and call it trauma, but they're bringing their historical experiences and their perceptions and their, whatever impressions they might have to those interactions. And many times we have to find a way to kind of dig ourselves out of a hole because maybe they had, a compliance officer in the past that did run roughshod over them. And that was just like the compliance officer at the job prior to that ran roughshod over them. I kind of find that to be an opportunity, though. I'm kind of I'm kind of an internal optimist kind of a person. But like, if somebody feels that way, I feel like it's almost easier to change their mind. Like, if somebody has a negative opinion about compliance, it's almost easier to change their mind as opposed to like an apathetic kind of non-opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, to start off on the right foot, like if you're coming into a new organization, I always meet with all the stakeholders, one-on-one. And I'm sure lots of people do that. But I think what I try to focus on in that meeting is how can I help you? And setting that tone right away that I'm not here to beat you up. I'm here to help you. And you get some really interesting conversations. You hear the horror stories. That's the first thing you always hear. But then you hear, well, there's something that's been bothering me for a while. And I don't know if it's an issue. You can almost, script it. And it's just, to me, it is fun. When I was in college, I worked part-time for a large ladies shop. And it was kind of the same thing. I had to win them over because they were inherently not trusting me. So I was young and I wasn't a large size lady. Right. And I made it my mission to be so helpful and to be so nice and to be authentic. That's a word we haven't used yet, to be authentic with them, non-judgmental, that I ended up being really successful in that role when they did not want to talk to me at first. And it's kind of analogous to the compliance officer in a lot of ways. It really is. So it's the same thing. I like what you said. I'm like that. I like to win them over and I like to show my value. I like to build trust. And
that word authentic, like if you looked at, you can do those Google searches on how often a word is like Googled or something, and you see various different words sort of have spikes in usage and stuff like that. I bet if you looked at the word authentic, you would have seen an increase in that over the last decade for sure. And it's probably higher now than it ever has been. And I think that authenticity, I don't know, it's like the basis of all human connection. It's definitely the basis of persuasion insofar as you can't persuade somebody or actually connect with somebody without that sort of authentic connection. What I find is that and look, I'm not throwing stones here. It's easy to kind of sit in the studio and sort of say the things that I say, but I think there are some pressures. I don't know. You think the world works a certain way and you try to sort of emulate what you might see your old boss do or another program do. And sometimes that ends up sort of shaving off some of the authenticity that I think is like really necessary to like gain traction with people. I had somebody on our webinar recently, this woman, Allison Taylor, who's really smart. And I don't know, I've learned a lot from her, but she teaches at the Stern School of Business. And so she has a bunch of Gen Zs coming through and she teaches ethics there and things like that. And she has a bunch of Gen Zs coming through and they oversample into authenticity to a greater degree than like our grandparents did for sure, right? Like our grandparents would, I don't know, they would watch commercials of doctors smoking cigarettes and be like, I guess we should switch to Pall Malls or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like this authenticity thing is really such a critical component because if people think compliance is this sort of sterilized, third rail, then people are going to stay away from it. If they realize that, to your point, I'm here to help, I'm here to make your life easier, I'm here to help us achieve our organizational goal, and I'm here to really kind of add like some lubrication to this machine that is our organization. For that to ever land, that authenticity has to be front and center.
No, I totally agree. And it's how you build trust. And once you build trust, they'll come to you, they'll work for you, they'll really be collaborative. But if you betray that trust, And I think the authenticity is particularly important now with all the technology.
Totally.
We even try to call somebody in a business and we get AI.
Right.
It's like you just can't talk to a person. You don't have those interactions like ever. And I think COVID and technology, both, they kind of went hand in glove, and it has really made it more important than ever.
So, I mean, let's kind of look forward over the next kind of 5 to 10 years. Where do you see our industry going? What do you think the skills are that we're going to have to employ, maybe even to a greater degree than we have in the past, in order to be successful and not get like AI'd away?
Yeah. Well, part of the challenge is that, historically, we've just been like, Medicare rules and HHS, and we haven't looked at this whole other side, and it's grown. So now, if you look at the cases and where things are going in the laws and regulations, we're going to have to be a lot more savvy about a lot more areas of technology and regulations, because HHS is no longer the only game in town when you're talking about all that technology. And, we talk about AI, but it's software as a medical device. The FDA is now all over it. FDA has reporting requirements if there's an incident. So we're going to have to understand a whole nother realm of things that we haven't worked on before. The FTC has gotten involved with lots of cases to do with website security and all sorts of stuff like that. So there's a lot we need to get more engaged in. We need to use those same people skills to have cross-functional exposure, to get involved with the team meetings in the tech department and the product selection committee and all these different areas that we may or may not have, but probably not usually been involved with. So it's going to take even more of those people skills, and we're going to have to learn more, because you have to learn where your risks are. And even if you don't own them, you at least have to be at the table and help people be aware. So the communication, knowing what's going on, is going to be more important than ever, because we can't just follow Medicare now and be able to have all the answers. It's a lot bigger scope.
Yeah. And, it's kind of fittingly paradoxical at a time where technology is washing across all of our businesses and all of our organizations. And there's this sort of inherent implicit pressure to learn them more and leverage technology more. The thing that's really going to elevate our profession is leaning into those fundamental things of human connection and building actual trust person to person. And really, it's going to be leaning into the things that like technology can't do,
Yeah. Yeah. And, the trust piece is very important, because we need to be involved with more stakeholders now. We should be involved with the people that are selecting tech products. Is there AI in that product? What do we know about that company? How comfortable are we with their security practices? I mean, it's a whole different ballgame. And if nobody is asking those questions, they're just going to sign up and buy the hot little widget that came across the desk with a good presentation. They're not going to be, mindful of those questions, those due diligence issues.
100%.
On the front end. Yeah.
I mean, the IT department, I love IT, of course, but like the IT department is many times just rubber stamping stuff, and they're not thinking about something from a compliance perspective. They're thinking about it from a straight IT perspective. And so we have to your point, we have this ability and we have this potential to be this circulatory system of the organization and touch all these different departments, because the things that like are on our docket or that are within our purview show up in sort of every single department. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's critical that those relationships are built. I love that. We're getting to the end here, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the books that you've written. You've written some really cool books. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of those. So which one should we start with? Because I don't know, you're a very interesting person. I love having somebody on who at least looks at the world the way I do. I was encouraged by your answer of like leaning into the human piece and that authenticity piece and the importance of being able to make those actual connections and, be that support role. And I've always wanted to write a book. And I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about that journey and what made you write the books that you've written.
Okay. Well, my first book was actually a novel, and it the reason I started writing it was because I was working up in New York right before Hurricane Sandy. And so I wanted to tell the story of what happened to those neighborhoods, because it was poor neighborhoods but it was where I lived for a year. So I wanted to write a novel. So I just started working on that and reading books about writing and, doing it as I went. And then it was, once you do a book, it's like, well, I should do another book, right? So I was working as a consultant, and I was working with a lot of new compliance officers. And I was discovering a lot of operational stuff that I was telling them, and a lot of how-tos and just basic stuff. And I thought, I should write a book with just this really conversational kind of guidelines. And that was the Insider's Guide to Compliance. That was the first one. And then I saw a gap where the smaller physician practices can't afford a compliance person. So I thought, I should write a book for them, just tailor some of that guidance to a smaller organization. So I did that. And then I did the health tech book, Law and Compliance, because I was working with a startup. And as their advisor, I wanted to do a deeper dive into what all laws and regulations we might be looking at. We knew HIPAA, but it's like the geek in me was like, how is this stuff regulated? If I build an app, how's that regulated? If I am a website developer, how's that regulated? What if I'm doing mobile services? Like, I started digging into all that, and the more I dug into it, the more perplexing it became, because it is such a patchwork. And I
totally
put it in a book, but it was the hardest book, and it's a thinner book, but it was the hardest one I've ever done. So that's those. And then I do medical thrillers, and the medical thrillers I think are interesting for me because I love to expose all the politics and the ethical dilemmas and all of that stuff. And of course you have to throw in bad guys and good guys. But that's a lot of fun too. So I've got 2 medical thrillers, and I'm working on the third one, which is going to be crimes that are involving technology.
Is it going to be in the same series? Is the third medical thriller is going to be part of a series?
Yes, it's the third one. I call it the Deception series. Hippocratic Deception. Yeah, Angels of Deception, and this one will be Deception 3.0.
Cool. Okay, very tech.
Yeah, it's a tech, and it's got some new characters that are kind of fun, and yeah, I enjoy it. It's like just a fun thing.
So how do you go through that process? I'm just so interested in this. Like, how do you go through the process of, like, I don't know. I mean, really, they're almost different sides of your brain to some degree, right?
Yeah,
like one is very sort of technical, and like you're kind of figuring out this patchwork on the tech one, or it's very specialized for the physician practices on the other one. And then sort of the other side of your brain are these like medical thrillers, they're fiction, they're novels. How do you start to go through that process on like, you just kind of have the idea and you just kind of jump in, and I'm asking, I've heard that some writers are like outline writers, and they really outline everything and they start kind of filling that in. Others like George R.R. Martin, maybe this is why the guy can't finish a book. He just kind of starts wandering through a story and it just sort of forms over time. Like, where on that spectrum do you think you are, and how does that whole thing work?
In the writing world, they call that plotters versus pantsers.
Yes,
Plotters
that's right.
Plot, and pantsers go by the seat of their pants. I would say I'm on more the side of pantser. I usually start with a concept. There'll be a few key things that I want to have in the story. And this is going to sound really goofy probably to a lot of people, but the characters write the story. So when I wrote my very first book, the Hurricane Sandy book, those characters, I liked them so well that I thought, I got to do something else with these people. And so, sorry, I have a cat jumping up. I thought, well, all the stuff that I see in my world, the headlines I see every day, right?
Yeah.
I thought, let's do that. So took my brand new little, young attorney and threw her into a crooked hospital with, and I thought of every crime I could, but it goes along and it just kind of develops itself. I mean, you have to now and then make sure there's certain structural requirements that are being met, So there's a lot to it. And on the compliance ones, I just identify a gap and then I just flesh it out and think of all the different categories of things that might be useful for that reader that I'm writing it for.
Well, I love it. This was a lot of fun. It was a fun episode here. Where can people learn? Oh, before I get to that, I always want to ask this question on every episode. If you could go back in time and find a young Susan, what's one piece of advice you wish you got earlier?
I would say learn the organization, the culture, and the politics before you open your mouth.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Smart.
very basic, but that was my first hard lesson.
Well, sometimes you got to go slow to go fast. You know, I did another episode with a guy named Forrest Deegan, and he came into a new organization and they were doing an expansion, you know, on like doing a bunch of JVs and stuff like that. And he kind of volunteered to do that. This is before he even started doing the compliance stuff. And in doing that, he got to totally see the lay of the land. You got to see the power structures. You got to see kind of how the business actually worked, not just sort of stated in the, you know, annual report, but where the power sort of resided, where it was clustered, things like that. And he was like, that just added such a tailwind to the change that he ended up pushing after that sort of project was over. So I love that advice. That's great. Susan, where can people find your books? Where can they find more about you and interact with you?
My books are on Amazon, so that's pretty easy. You can just look up my name and you'll have all my books. I have a website, susanwalberg.com, pretty easzy. And I'm always on LinkedIn. So
I love it.
If anyone can't find me, they're not trying.
They're not looking.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, Susan. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Ethics Experts. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.